Yeah, no, I heard him. Okay, so I don't know if we're gonna start from the top, but Shalom Israel.
Shalom again, yes.
I'm Shamar Yah. We had a bit of technical difficulties, so we did have to restart the stream. But what we're going over tonight is the dietary law according to the Bible. And we're going to be covering different aspects of the dietary law. So first, we're going to start off with herbs. A lot of questions arise about herbs because things such as mushrooms are a spore. They're not technically, they don't bear seed. So go to Genesis 1 and 29.
Genesis 1 and 29. And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed which
Okay.
is upon the face of all the earth,
Uh-huh.
and every tree in which there is fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat.
So they say, well, a mushroom is a spore. It doesn't have it doesn't produce a seed. It doesn't naturally produce a seed. But you'll notice there are two words that he uses in the scripture which are pivotal. He uses the word bearing and yielding. Give me the definition of bearing first. Actually, you had yielding? Let's go ahead and read yielding.
All right.
No, that's fine.
Okay, so yield, the definition is to bear or bring forth as a natural product.
So it's a natural product. So if you look at mushrooms, even as a child, getting up, or if you ever get up early in the morning, you'll see that mushrooms grow naturally out of the grass or wherever it is that there's dew. They're a naturally occurring product or a naturally occurring process. Mushrooms don't require cultivation, or rather, they don't require any interference. They'll naturally grow. So even if you decide to pick them, cut them, whatever the case may be, in due season, mushrooms typically will grow back because they're a naturally occurring plant. Go ahead.
And bear, the definition is to produce fruit, also known as yield.
Okay. Also, so they're also interchangeable. So if it is a naturally reproducing organism, as far as a vegetable or a fruit or whatever the case may be is concerned, it's naturally occurring. That's what he's talking about as far as bearing or yielding seed. If it's bringing forth another version of itself naturally, then it's fine for us to eat. Go ahead and read verse 30.
Verse 30. And to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life, I've given every green herb for meat. And it was so.
And then go to Romans 4 and 15, because a lot of people will still say, well, it's been so many different arguments, but 1 Thessalonians 5 and 21 says, prove all things. So at the end of the day, which we're about to read, where there's no law, there is no sin. So when it comes to vegetation specifically, or the other questions that arise, unless it can be said that there is a law prohibiting, because when we get into meat, the Most High very clearly stated which things were clean, which ones were unclean, and then even how down to treating their carcasses, how the carcasses should be handled. But when it comes to vegetation, there are no such laws. But go ahead, read that, Romans 4.
Romans 4 and 15.
Uh-huh.
Because the law worketh wrath, for where no law is, there is no transgression.
There's no transgression. So, and then that's another point as far as when you're getting into only vegetation. You know, some people, well, let me see. I don't want to get too ahead of myself. We are, you know, we're going to read this article. So we're talking about GMO. A lot of people say, well, that, okay, you know, with the unclean animals, or that all animals are unclean, that they're just going to stick specifically to vegetation. And GMO became really popular a few years ago, at least as far as the notoriety publicly, where a lot of people started catching on, a lot of people started being a little more aware. That still has a very big influence, because if you consider, okay, all I'm going to do is eat only herbs, that's still not going to be necessarily a foolproof stance or a foolproof way to completely avoid being defiled. Read the first paragraph in the highlighted sections.
This is from Environmental Health Perspectives, titled Genetically Modified Foods, Breeding Uncertainty. Genetically modified crops first appeared commercially in the mid-1990s to what seemed a bright and promising future. Resistant to pests and the herbicides used to control weeds, these new crops were so popular with farmers that millions of acres were planted with them by the turn of the millennium. Today, GM crops are grown commercially by 8.25 million farmers on 200 million acres spread throughout 17 countries.
So regardless of where you are, chances are you're eating something that's genetically modified. When you're talking, I mean, it's not just something that's particular to the U.S., though the article does state that the U.S. is one of the heaviest buyers and heaviest growers. Drop down to the highlighted section.
They also worry that the spread of GM crops, which are supplied mainly by a handful of multinational companies, fuels corporate ownership of the seed supply and threatens the purity of indigenous crops.
So, when the crops that are grown that are not indigenous, they threaten the indigenous crops, and it's the seeds. So even trying, a lot of people try to go off the grid. Not, personally, I respect that. I don't think there's any harm in it, but the scriptures do speak about being overzealous, as well as us eating the foul bread in our captivity. There's only so much that you can do when it comes to trying to eat clean or trying to eat something that's undefiled. Genetically modified organisms are especially heavy in the vegetation. They're across 17 countries, and this is an older article. I believe this is from 05. So, and it says when it is planted and when it's taken to a new region, it threatens the DNA, I guess, the cleanliness of the DNA of the indigenous crop. Go ahead to the next section. No. Let me see. So again, this is from Environmental Health Perspectives, Volume 113, number 8. Read that top one and then flip the page, and I believe it's the next section.
From page A528. Exports, according to the U.S. Department or Agriculture Economic Research Service, U.S. It's just an anagram. And in November 2004, the world's largest agrochemical company, the Swiss-based Syngenta, moved its European GM field trials to the United States.
So if you're in the U.S., unfortunately, you're a little worse off because all other countries that receive backlash from farmers, receive backlash from their citizens, a lot of them said, okay, well, they purchased American land and now they grow that. So if you're in America, you're even less likely to be able to find clean food, clean seeds, clean crops, anything of that nature. Flip the page. And the reason why we're bringing this out, because you might say, okay, genetically modified organism. Well, what's wrong with that? As we read earlier in the article, it was supposed to be resistant to the pests, and it was resistant to the herbicides that they use.
Right.
It sounds like a plus. It sounds like a superfood, but it's what they're mixing these things with. One in particular was a tomato. It's what they're mixing into the DNA or the genetic makeup of the vegetation that's important. Read that boxing section there.
From page A530. Thus, genes from bacteria can be introduced into a plant.
So that's one of the ways that they genetically modify. They introduce the genes of a bacteria into the plant. So for one, partially bacteria. Not necessarily the worst thing. I wouldn't find anything that as far as bacteria is concerned alone, but keep going.
Or, as in one instance, a fish gene can be introduced into a tomato.
So there we go. So wait a minute. Now we're getting into a fish gene. What kind of fish? It's mentioned somewhere in the article. I believe it's within the next few lines. It was a flounder. So it's introduced into the genome of a tomato. So what does that mean? As we mentioned, as the article mentioned earlier, the seeds of the tomato, they cannot sit there and decipher which ones are genetically modified, which ones are not. They can't see from the crop. They can't tell from the indigenous crop. It basically, and I guess a big thing to go and research is germification. It's hard to stop that process because plants reproduce naturally. So when you're looking into whether or not those things are clean, that's a really big factor because it's introduced with a type of fish. And this is just tomatoes. So it's not to mention all the other types of crops that have been defiled or all the other types of crops that had other genes implemented into their genomes. All those things are things that you have to research, but at a certain point, like I said, it becomes something that's out of your control and something that even if you try to say, okay, I'm going off the grid, I'm buying these seeds, I'm going to plant my own, well, how do you know those seeds haven't been affected by the crop of these GMOs? Was that? Let me see.
You have a lot more.
Stop there. Nah, we can stop there, yeah. We can go to Ezekiel chapter 4 and verse 13. We're going to go there, and then that'll be all that's spoken as far as the plants, and we'll get into animals next.
Okay.
Because again, when you look into plants, it becomes it's often up for debate more often than animals, at least from what I've seen in my personal experience. That plants gets argued a lot more because the laws don't say, and the tomato you can, or and the onion, it doesn't say anything as far as those lines. It goes for herb yielding seed, and then it's a bit difficult to decipher which herbs have not been completely defiled and which ones are. But as far as the scriptures are concerned, all those things are lawful. But read Ezekiel.
Ezekiel chapter 4 and verse 16.
Uh-huh.
Moreover, he said unto me, Son of man, behold, I will break the staff of bread in Jerusalem, and they shall eat bread by weight, and with care, and they shall drink water by measure, and with astonishment.
4 and 13.
Oh, excuse me, that was verse 16. My bad.
Yeah, okay.
Verse 13. And the Lord said, Even thus shall the children of Israel eat their defiled bread among the Gentiles.
Eating defiled bread. So the reason I'm bringing that out, because again, we're talking about the dietary law, and it's not to say that it's impossible to keep, but I just hear that so often, because when you're talking about the dietary law, it's pretty cut and simple. At least I feel as though it is. But a lot of people come up with questions and contentions, and what about this? What about that? The Most High said they're going to eat defiled bread in the land of their captivity once it really comes down to it. There's a difference. Don't get me wrong, and let me put this out as a statement. There's a difference between straight up going to a piece of pork or a pork chop and taking a bite and saying, hey, we got a defiled bread. That's totally different. There is a dietary law that is in place, but there are quite a few things that are that have been interfered with as far as man is concerned. And as far as what things are clean and unclean, like the scripture say in Genesis 1:29 and 30, anything that's a naturally occurring process as far as vegetation is concerned, it can reproduce itself without any, I suppose you could say, any outside influence, not man-made, whatever the case may be. That is clean. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and get into animals. Go to Leviticus 7 and 24. So even of the animals, they are clean and unclean. But before we even get to which ones are clean and which ones are unclean, before that even comes to effect, you cannot eat certain animals in certain environments, such as one that dieth of itself. Go ahead.
Leviticus 7 and 24.
Uh-huh.
And the fat of the beast that dieth of itself, and the fat of that which is torn with beasts, may be used in any other use, but ye shall in no wise eat of it.
So, and everyone wants to talk about survival. The apocalypse is a big subject in all the movies, TV shows, Walking Dead. If you ever found yourself in that situation, you cannot eat an animal that has died of itself, and you cannot eat an animal that was killed by other animals. So if you come across a deer and it's been clearly clawed up from the neck up, you're like, man, that thigh looks fresh. It died of other animals. You can't touch it. That's defiled meat. It says you can do whatever you want to. You can take the pelt, make you clothing or tools, whatever the case may be, but you are not to eat of that meat. Read verse 25.
25. For whosoever eateth the fat of the beast, which men offer an offering made by the fire unto the Lord, even that soul that eateth it shall be cut off from his people.
That's talking about the law of sacrifice, saying that we couldn't partake of those sacrifices. Read on to verse 26.
26. Moreover, ye shall eat no manner of blood.
And no blood. That's another thing. So that cancels out sushi. What's another raw food that people like? That's a big one, though. Sushi's a really big one. But that cancels. Medium rare steaks. Everybody, that's right. Like, man, especially them Edomites, boy. They love the blood and the meat. Ceviche, all that kind of stuff. You cannot partake of any of these raw foods. So anything that still has the blood in it, or even if you get some food or you out at a restaurant, you get you a burger, you get you a steak, you cut into it and see blood, send it back. Hey, I need this well done or extra well done. I cannot partake of this blood. Go to, and that's another thing, because when we're talking about animals that died of themselves, what are we talking about? Mad cow disease. Yeah, right. And roadkill, that's another big one. But mad cow disease, that's something that was transferable from animals to humans. There are only certain types of viruses and bacteria diseases that are transferable, but for those that are, you're not supposed to eat of that animal that died of itself. Even the coronavirus, that came from an animal, at least from throughout all the speculation, but they say from a bat. But that would have been an unlawful animal in the first place. So if the world was keeping the commandments, this pandemic literally would not exist.
And they couldn't capitalize off it either.
So now we see that we can't eat of anything that died of itself, that died of other animals. no blood, and if anything was sacrificed, it wasn't for a normal man to partake of. Go to Leviticus 11. So now we're going to actually dive into which animals the Most High said are clean and which ones he said are not clean. Leviticus 11, start at verse 1.
Leviticus 11 and 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses and to Aaron, saying unto them, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, These are the beasts which ye shall eat among all the beasts that are on the earth.
So the Most High said, these are the beasts that are okay. So he's going to go into the dietary law as far as which animals are clean and which ones are not clean. Read on.
Whatsoever parteth the hoof.
Okay, so it has to have a split hoof.
And is cloven-footed.
Cloven-footed.
And
and so for cloven-footed, it's like that extra little. I should have. You know what? This would have been a great time for a picture.
Yeah.
If you look up, let me see. Deer have that. It's basically like an extra little finger that's higher up on the forearm of the animal.
Yeah.
That's a cloven-footed animal. So it has to have a split hoof. So you can't eat a horse. Nothing that has one solid piece. It has to be cloven-footed, which is to have that. Again, it's like an extra little nub. I believe dogs and even cats have that, though that doesn't qualify them either.
Right.
But it's something as an example that I think people are a little more privy to. So it has to have a split hoof. It has to have all three of these. Split hoof, cloven-footed, and what's the third one?
And cheweth the cud.
And it has to chew the cud.
Among the beasts.
Among the beasts, okay. Verse 4.
Nevertheless, these shall ye not eat of them that chew the cud, or of them that have, or of them that divide the hoof.
So he said these have two, but what was it that he said? That he said these are the ones that chew the cud, they divide the hoof, but these are the ones that you are not to eat. Go ahead.
As the camel, because he cheweth the cud, but divideth not the hoof.
So he divides not the hoof. So he has one, but he doesn't have the other. Each animal that you decided, or if you're deciding whether or not it's going to be lawful for you to eat, it has to fit all three criteria. Can't have two, it can't have one, it can't be partial, has to be the whole thing. So he said camels have, if I'm not mistaken, they have a shoe like a horse, don't they?
Yeah, single hoof.
Yeah, one big hoof. So that's another thing. It says the camel is not lawful for us to eat. Go ahead.
He is unclean to you.
Uh-huh.
And the coney, because he cheweth the cud, but divided not the hoof, he is unclean unto you.
Quite a different old old names for the different animals. I would recommend getting a Bible dictionary as you follow along to go into what each animal was. Some of them are obvious, like hares. Some people still refer to rabbits as hares. Swine, some people still refer to that. But you go into conies, and there are some complicated ones. So again, for the sake of understanding, make sure that it has all three. And if you want to actually highlight what kind of animal this is today, I would recommend a Bible dictionary. Go ahead.
And the hare, because he cheweth the cud, but divideth not the hoof.
He has a paw. Go ahead.
He is unclean to you.
Uh-huh.
And the swine.
Everybody's favorite, especially amongst Israel. Man, it's a restaurant I passed on the way over here. Specializes in beef and pork. That is not for us. As popular as it is amongst our people, this is an unclean animal which we should not be partaking of. Go ahead.
The swine, though he divided the hoof and be cloven-footed, yet he cheweth not the cud. He is unclean to you.
So prime example of having 2 out of 3. It divides the hoof, it's cloven-footed, but it doesn't chew the cud. Chewing the cud means that it's a vegetarian animal. It's an herbivore. So swine or pigs especially, they are...
everything more.
Yeah. I liken them unto natural garbage dispensers. A lot of times, I've watched even documentaries where farmers they're like, oh, well, I love my pigs because my pigs are easiest to feed. They'll take the garbage or whatever gets thrown out at buffets and restaurants in their county, and they'll just feed it to their pigs. You can give a pig anything. And they're very unclean animals. Another thing to look into is, scientifically, pigs do not have sweat glands. So they don't have a way of expelling toxins the same way that certain animals do, or even humans do. So they hold on to the toxicity of everything that they're eating. They don't have a way of expelling it outside of fecal matter or urination. Go ahead.
Of their flesh shall ye not eat, and their carcasses shall ye not touch.
So that's another thing. So when you're talking about clean and unclean, not only are you supposed to not eat of the pig and all these other animals, you are not supposed to touch their carcass. You're not supposed to have anything to do with these unclean animals. Go ahead.
Them shall ye not eat. And all that have not fins and scales in the seas.
Hold on. This is not say.
Oh, I skipped verse 9.
Yeah, you go.
Excuse me.
No, verse 8.
And I'll read verse 8 again.
Go ahead.
Of their flesh shall ye not eat,
Uh-huh.
and their carcass shall ye not touch. They are unclean to you.
So we're not supposed to have anything to do, like I said, with the meat of that animal as far as eating, and you're not supposed to be touching the carcass of that animal. Go ahead.
Verse 9. These shall you eat of all that are in the waters.
So now you're talking about waters, rivers, seas, very plain and simple. But there's a requirement for anything that you were to draw out of the water as well. Go ahead.
Whatsoever hath fins and scales in the waters, in the seas, and in the rivers, them shall ye eat.
So it has to have fins and scales. Relatively simple criteria. You're looking at things such as crabs, crustaceans, crabs, shrimps, lobsters. Another huge one amongst the children of Israel as far as unfortunate, Babylon specials, I'm going to call them. Babylon specials. They have a exoskeleton, which means their skeleton is on the outside of them. They have shells. That does not constitute for a fin, and it does not constitute for scales. Those things are all unclean. Again, natural garbage disposers. One of the things that I always like to look at, because everyone's seen it, what was that kid's movie? Finding Nemo, right? Nemo got dropped into the shark tank, shark bait, and then they had the shrimp clean them off. That's literally a shrimp's purpose. It is a cleaner. So if you watch nature documentaries, there are ecosystems that are they're set in place. They have an equilibrium that's already set outside of humans, and they, like certain animals, it's almost like a bartering system. Like there's a certain type of fish that cleans off crustaceans, and it gets left alone by sharks because it'll pick parasites off of a shark. I mean, there's all kinds of different animals that, in a sense, serve each other, but those animals are not clean for us to eat when they don't fit these criteria. But that's basically their purpose. Go ahead.
And all that have not fins and scales in the seas and in the rivers, of all that move in the waters, and of any living thing which is in the waters, they shall be an abomination unto you.
So, like I said, no gator, that's a big one. Eels, shrimps, crabs, lobsters, octopus, what is that? Calamari, that's a big one. Yeah. All those things are not to be partaken of as far as the children of Israel are concerned. All those things are unclean to us. We don't need to have anything to do with the meat, and we don't have anything to do with the carcass of those animals. Read on.
Verse 11. They shall be even an abomination unto you.
And that's another thing. He said an abomination. That's like the worst thing that you can think of, like the most disgusting or vile thing that were to come in contact with you or were to be around you. And a lot of people ask, well, this is one that was funny that I was taught when I first came into the truth. Was like, well, what about if you have some pepperoni pizza and you just pick the pepperonis off? For one, that it's already been made unclean, so that pizza is not to be eaten. But one brother liking it, he said, imagine if it was some doo-doo on your pizza. Would you just pick it off and eat it? And that was one thing that made me like, oh, no, I wouldn't do that. If it was something like, it could be a piece of doo-doo in a room and you wouldn't even want to be with it. That's how we should liken these unclean animals in the eyes of the Most High. And it's not to say that we can't have these animals. Like I said, they have a purpose. But once they're dead and gone, they have no benefit to you, and they have nothing to do with you. Go ahead.
They shall be an abomination unto you. Ye shall not eat of their flesh, but ye shall have their carcasses in abomination. Whatsoever hath no fins, no scales in the waters, that shall be an abomination unto you. And these are they which ye shall have an abomination among the fowls.
Fowls are birds. Go ahead.
They shall not be eaten. They are an abomination. The eagle and the ostrich and the osprey and the vulture and the kite after his kind, every raven after his kind, and the owl and the nighthawk and the cuckoo and the hawk after his kind, and the little owl and the cormorant and the great owl.
So basically, in short, all of these are birds of prey. We're talking about eagles, owls. They're all birds that hunt smaller animals, smaller birds, whatever the case may be. Those are birds that we are not to eat. Go ahead.
And the swan and the pelican and the gear eagle and the stork and the heron after her kind and the lapwing and the bat. All fowls that creep, this is switching it up, all fowls that creep going upon all four shall be an abomination unto you.
Believe flightless birds, penguins.
Oh,
What's another one? Ostrich? They can't fly.
it mentioned ostrich actually.
Right, okay, right. It did mention ostrich, but ostriches can't fly. It's a big bird. But those flightless birds, those are not. That's not penguins. Not something that we can eat either. But actually, they're a bird of prey as well. They eat mackerel or whatever region that they're in. Go ahead.
Yet these may ye eat of every flying, creeping thing that goeth upon all four, which have legs above their feet, to leap withal upon the earth.
He's gonna go into it. Grasshoppers, legs above their feet. Their legs literally are over their feet. Go ahead.
Even these of them ye may eat, the locust after his kind.
Good old locust, high in protein, good eating.
Man, crunchy.
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 Crunchy, man.
You know, we haven't been taught in certain cultures they eat bugs. A lot of times they're eating unlawful bugs, but we haven't always been taught that, at least not here in America. But locusts are lawful. Locusts, grasshoppers, crickets, all those things. Notice the structure of their leg. Their leg is literally like an elbow above their foot. He said all those things are lawful for us to eat. Yeah, you got to get used to it. It's a little bit of a change, but I mean, I've tried crickets before. They're not bad.
Just fry them up.
Yeah, you fry them up, season them right. Israelite. Go ahead.
Right.
Verse
22.
Yes.
And the bald locust after his kind, and the beetle after his kind, and the grasshopper after his kind.
Okay.
But all other flying, creeping things which have 4 feet shall be an abomination unto you.
So all other types of bugs, which are not after those, again, those are herbivores. Grasshoppers, locusts. There was actually just a huge swarm of locusts recently within the past couple of months that came and threatened crops across a couple of different countries. And I think one of them was in Africa. They were talking about how it eats tons of food. The locusts come in and eat tons of food every year. Herbivores. Go ahead, read on.
Verse 24. And for these ye shall be unclean. Whosoever toucheth the carcass of them shall be unclean until the even.
Walk outside to dump the trash, step on a bug, unclean. This is a little less prevalent because we don't have a temple that we specifically have to show up and be clean or unclean to, but you will still be unclean until the even if you touched any of those animals' carcasses. Go ahead.
And whosoever beareth aught of the carcass of them shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the even.
So you hit a pig, you hit a whatever, you know, or like I said, you step on a bug, you have to touch the carcass, you become unclean until the even. You're supposed to wash your clothes, wash your body. You're going to be unclean until sundown, and once the sun goes down and it's a new day, then you become clean again. Go ahead.
The carcasses of every beast which divideth the hoof and is not cloven-footed, nor cheweth the cud, are unclean to you. Every one that toucheth them shall be unclean. And whatsoever goeth upon his paws.
Upon paws. So that's what I was talking about earlier. We mentioned that dogs were cloven-footed because they have that little nub on the, I guess you could say the forearm of the dog, but it has a paw. So dogs, cats, lions. What's something else with a paw that's relatively popular?
I was going to say wolves, but those are basically dogs.
Wolves, which are also, pretty much just bigger dogs. All those things are unlawful. All those things are unclean. So, you know, especially with the pandemic, one of the biggest, I guess, attention things that have been have a lot of attention on them is the diet of Moab, how they eat dogs and cats and all that. And if for you, Israelite man, Israelite woman, that ain't for us. Anything with a paw, that is unlawful. Go ahead. Squirrels. That's it. Oh yeah. There we go. Our down south brethren. I've been down south, got family. That was the first question. Got out the car. Ever had squirrel cutting? I said no. Ever had possum? No. Coon? No. Welcome to the South. I said no, it's not. No, I'm not welcome. I'm not eating none of that. That's all unlawful. But that is something that, you know, unfortunately our people have partaken in certain aspects or certain parts of the country in certain aspects is something that they consider to be a part of the culture. And, you know, my cousins even explained, when you're starving and you don't have anything to eat, no one's hiring Israelites, then you kind of cook and eat whatever it is that you can find. But ultimately, you know, the scriptures say if the fowls of the air don't reap or sow, and yet they're fed, then how much more important are you than a bird? You do have to trust in the Most High in those scenarios as far as refusing or restraining to eat those things that are unlawful. The scriptures say, strive for the truth unto death. So that is something to keep in mind when it comes to the unlawful foods. Don't partake of them, don't touch of them. And then the things that are popular as far as down south, all those things, anything with the paw, that's not to do with us. Go ahead.
Those are unclean unto you.
Uh-huh.
Whoso toucheth their carcass shall be unclean unto the heathen.
Mm-hmm.
And he that beareth the carcass of them shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the even. They are unclean unto you.
Uh-huh.
These also shall be unclean unto you among the creeping things that creep upon the earth.
So you're talking about the little animals, things that creep upon the earth, things that are low upon the earth. Go ahead.
The weasel,
Weasels. Go
and
ahead.
the mouse,
Mm-hmm.
and the tortoise after his kind,
Turtle soup.
and
Mouse.
the ferret,
Mm-hmm.
and the chameleon,
Uh-huh.
and the lizard, and the snail.
The escargot.
Man, no. And the mole.
That's really a delicacy. A lot of things, especially with the heathen, they have some very disgusting delicacies in France or Paris, France. Escargot, food made literally out of snails. It's disgusting. Don't have nothing to do with you, Israel. Don't let them confuse you, because the crazy part about it, if you look at delicacies, they're usually always things that are unlawful. Calamari, shrimp and crab and lobster, all these things that they price super high and that they hold high, that the heathen hold in high regard, all of these things are unlawful for us being Israelites. And not only do we eat them, but they're in such a place where we feel like that's doing it big. We feel like that's a celebratory meal. Oh, man, we had a good time. Or, oh, man, you know, we celebrating a marriage, a graduation, whatever the case may be. We going for some surf and turf. And it's eating lobsters and shrimps. All that stuff is unlawful. That is all the custom of the heathen and has nothing to do with the children of Israel. Go ahead.
And upon whatsoever any of them, when they are dead, doth fall, it shall be unclean it should be unclean.
Verse 31, ready from the top.
Yes, verse 31. These are unclean to you among all that creep.
Uh-huh.
Whosoever doth touch them when they be dead shall be unclean unto the even.
Okay, go ahead.
And upon whatsoever any of them, when they are dead, doth fall, it shall be unclean.
So if the dead animal or the dead carcass of any of these things that are unclean happens to fall on something, let's see, I would say you have a sack of rice and you find a dead mouse, but no one really, not very many people carry their food in sacks anymore. But basically, if you find a dead animal, a dead bug, whatever the case may be, whatever it is that food that was in there, it's all unclean. Or whatever it is that it fell upon needs to be washed and it's unclean. Go ahead.
Whether it be any vessel of wood or raiment or skin or sack, whatsoever vessel it be wherein any work is done, it must be put into water, and it shall be unclean until the even, so that it shall be cleansed.
So you soak it. Good old Israelite tactic. Don't feel like doing the dishes. You soak it. You come back to it. But that's really what makes it clean in the eyes of the Most High. As far as if that dead animal, for whatever reason, you caught it in some kind of trap and it wanders off and touches something that's of yours, dies in your food, whatever the case may be, or dies in a cabinet and touches a plate, you have to clean those things off before you continue to use them because they're unclean. Go ahead.
And every earthen vessel whereinto any of them falleth, whatsoever in it shall be unclean, and ye shall break it.
And so certain things you also have to break. Certain things, and you've had instances like that where they kind of just make the joke like, man, just throw the whole whatever it is away. That really does come to a point where something is defiled or it falls into an earthen vessel where it's like, all right, look, just throw the whole thing away. It just has to be broken. It's no longer a use to us. Get rid of it. Go ahead.
Of all meat which may be eaten, that on which such water cometh shall be unclean. And all drink that may be drunk in every such vessel shall be unclean.
Uh-huh.
And everything whereupon any part of their carcass falleth shall be unclean. Whether it be oven or ranges for pots, they shall be broken down.
So, and that's another thing, and that kind of goes out for like the super brews. They'd be like, man, we got to keep all the laws, and we're going to be 100% perfect in Babylon. We got to do this, this, and that. We are supposed to be keeping the laws in captivity, and we are supposed to be keeping the laws in this land. But when you're talking about clean and unclean, literally, if you have an oven that has ever had an unlawful piece of an animal or something like that, to touch it has to be broken down. Countertops, ranges for pots, says they shall be broken down. So even when you move into a house, how do you assure that there has never been an unclean animal in that house, or there has never been an unclean animal to have died on your countertop, or even if someone was to eat a pepperoni pizza and a pepperoni falls on the countertop, get some dishes, or you used to cook pork with them, or whatever the case may be, all those things are unclean. All those things have to be broken. Go ahead.
For they are unclean, and shall be unclean unto you.
Uh-huh.
Nevertheless, a fountain or a pit where there is plenty of water shall be clean.
So it says a fountain or a pit. So you have a mass amount of water. I mean, I don't really know how much water would be in a fountain. I don't know. Let's say 10,000 gallons of water, and you happen to come across a little tiny dead mouse, and that's not going to defile all that water. Go ahead.
Shall be clean.
Uh-huh.
But that which toucheth their carcass shall be unclean.
So it doesn't mean that animal is certainly suddenly clean just because it's in a massive body of water. If you touch that animal, or that animal touches you, or you dip your cup in a river and come up and it's a mouse in there, it's a dead mouse, that cup is now unclean, you're now unclean. It still doesn't clean that animal, but the water itself can be taken of. Go ahead.
And if any part of their carcass fall upon any sowing seed, which is to be sown, it shall be clean.
Uh-huh.
But if any water be put upon the seed.
So it's talking about if you have seeds, if you have grain you plan on planting, and those seeds are still closed up, because when they actually water, that little vegetation begins to burst through, and that's the actual plant itself. So if it hasn't been watered, it hasn't bursted forth, then it's still clean. You can get rid of it. You can still use those seeds. But if the water has already been put on those seeds, like you've already planted them, they're growing and they're going to burst forth out of that little shell. Go ahead.
And any part of their carcass fall thereon, it shall be unclean unto you.
You can no longer use it. So if you, I don't know too much about farming, but if you're prepping seeds and you dip them in water or soaking them or whatever the case may be, and some little animal comes along, tries to eat of it, and dies in there, then you can no longer use those seeds for whatever purpose you had intended for them.
Right.
Go ahead.
And if any beast of which ye may eat die, he that toucheth the carcass thereof shall be unclean until the evening.
He said, any beast of which ye may eat die, he that touches. So if if the animal dies and you touch that carcass, even of the clean, it still makes you unclean. Go ahead.
He that eateth of the carcass of it shall wash his clothes and be unclean unto the even.
Mm-hmm.
He also that beareth the carcass of it shall wash his clothes and be unclean unto even.
Uh-huh.
And every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth shall be an abomination. It shall not be eaten.
Go ahead. Get specific.
Whatsoever goeth upon the belly.
So a snake. He talks about chameleons and lizards, a lot of reptiles, snakes, anything that goes upon its belly that literally stays on the ground. It's a creeping thing. It's not to be eaten. Go ahead.
And whatsoever goeth upon all four.
Uh-huh.
Or whatsoever hath more feet among all creeping things that creep upon the earth.
So centipedes, millipedes, spiders, it has more feet than all the other creeping things, because he talks about creeping things when he's talking about, basically, when you read creeping things, to keep it simple, is likening unto something that's low unto the ground. Bugs, animals, small animals, anything that's very low to the ground, that's what he's talking about with creeping things. Now, he says some of them, such as the locust, the grasshopper, the cricket, things of that nature, they were clean because, again, they have legs over their feet. But when he's talking about things that go upon the belly, those things are unclean. Go ahead. Oh, and then the multiple feet, the spiders, the centipedes, the millipedes, things that have more legs than the other creeping things, those are also unclean. Go ahead.
Hath more feet among all creepy things that creep upon the earth, them shall ye not eat, for they are an abomination.
Uh-huh.
Ye shall not make yourselves abominable with any creepy thing that creepeth, neither shall ye make yourselves unclean with them, that ye should be defiled thereby.
Uh-huh.
For I am the Lord your God, ye shall therefore sanctify yourselves, and ye shall be holy. For I am holy.
So this is what sets us apart. You know how many exasperated looks you get when you say, I don't eat pork? Man, I've had jobs where, you gain favor. People try to bring you lunch or whatever the case may be. And they say, oh, you don't eat meat. I said, I never said I don't eat meat. I don't eat pork. oh man, I could have swore you don't eat meat. It's like
No.
said I don't eat this one thing, but it really sets you apart where there's a world full of darkness and you be the only light, or there's a world full of wickedness and you be the only righteous. That literally is what separates you from the rest of the nation of Israel that refuses to repent, but also the other nations that don't want to know the Most High and have no desire of keeping the commandments. Go ahead.
For I am the Lord that brings you up. Excuse me.
Verse 45.
Yes, 45.
Uh-huh.
For I am the Lord that bring you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. Ye shall therefore be holy, for I am holy.
Uh-huh.
This is the law of the beasts, and of the fowl, and of every living creature that moveth in the waters, and of every creature that creepeth upon the earth, to make a difference between the unclean and the clean, and between the beasts that may be eaten and the beasts that may not be eaten.
The beasts that may be eaten, the beasts that may not be eaten. Go to Deuteronomy chapter 14 and verse 1. He pretty much, well, actually, I'll show you. He pretty much reiterates the same thing that's written in Leviticus 11, but there's like 2 or 3 key points to make. Go ahead.
Deuteronomy 14 and verse 1.
Mm-hmm.
Ye are the children of the Lord your God. Ye shall not cut yourselves, nor make any baldness between your eyes for the dead.
Mm-hmm.
For thou art an holy people unto the Lord thy God. And the Lord hath chosen thee to be a peculiar people unto himself, above all the nations that are upon the earth.
And that's another thing. The Most High holds us in high regard. And that's why he said, I hold you above all nations upon the face of the earth. But it's because we keep these laws that we're a special people unto the Most High, one of which being the dietary law, not taking of anything that's defiled, not partaking of any abominations. That's a big thing to the Most High. And that's why he said, you're going to be holy just like I'm holy. You're going to be separate just like I'm separate, because we're not like these other nations. We are special in the eyes of the Most High. Go ahead.
Verse 3. Thou shalt not eat any abominable thing. These are the beasts which ye shall eat.
So he goes back into what we read previously in Leviticus chapter 11. He goes back down the list, gives you examples of the animals, says which ones are clean, which ones aren't. Go to verse 7 just to go ahead, solidify that.
Verse 7. Nevertheless, these shall ye not eat of them that chew the cud, or of them that divideth the cloven.
I'm sorry, verse 6.
Oh, verse 6.
Uh-huh.
And every beast that parteth the hoof,
Uh-huh.
and cleaveth the cleft into 2 claws,
Uh-huh.
and cheweth the cud among the beasts, that shall ye eat.
So he said the same things. And that this time he actually was a little more specific. He said, cleaveth the cleft into 2 claws. So talking about cloven-footed. So it says, the part of the hoof, cloven-footed, cheweth the cud, same thing that we read in Leviticus 11. Those are the animals that the children of Israel are allowed to partake in. Drop down to verse 21.
Verse 21 in chapter 14.
Uh-huh.
Ye shall not eat of anything that dieth of itself.
So again, going back to anything that died of itself. If the animal got sick, it ate something bad, it had a disease, it had bacteria, whatever the case may be, you cannot eat of that. Go ahead.
Thou shalt give it unto the stranger that is in thy gates.
But you can give it unto the stranger. So if you were to come across, say, some Moabites that just came and, they just sold their victuals in the land of Israel. Now they're coming out with a bag full of money, and you be like, man, you went outside this morning and killed a possum. You don't want anything to do with it. You don't know what you want to do with the body, but they'll eat it. You can sell it to them. It's no problem, because they're not special to the Most High. There are no people to the Most High. So you can give them of these other animals, of these other, of these carcasses or of these unclean things. Go ahead.
Thou shalt give it unto the stranger that is in thy gates,
Uh-huh.
that he may eat it, or thou mayest sell it unto an alien.
Which is basically a foreigner, someone that was not of the children of Israel. Go ahead.
For thou art an holy people unto the Lord thy God. Thou shalt not seethe a kid in his mother's milk.
So he said you're a special people, and then seething a kid in his mother's milk is a suckling, what the scriptures call a suckling, a very young lamb or sheep, something that was that young and was not to be taken of away from its mother. Go to, let's go to Colossians chapter 2 and verse 16. We're going to get a couple more. I'm not going to hold you too long. I only have about two or three more scriptures.
Okay.
Colossians 2 and 16.
Colossians chapter 2 and verse 16.
Uh-huh.
Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of an holy day or of the new moon or of the Sabbath day.
So if you've ever talked to a Christian, that becomes one of their favorite fallbacks. Well, let no man judge you in meat. You know, this was something that was a part of the Old Testament, but this is not something that's part of the New Testament. Go to Revelation 22 and 14.
Revelations chapter 22 and verse 14. Blessed are they that do his commandments, that they may have right to the tree of life and may enter in through the gates into the city.
So even in the last book, in the last chapter, the scriptures never disannulled, and the Most High never disannulled the law that he gave to the children of Israel. All these things are still into effect to this day. All these things are still to be practiced and exercised, whether you're going to a restaurant, whether you're cooking at home, when you make your decisions as to what you're going to eat, all these laws still have to be taken into consideration unto this day. But now let's go back to Colossians. Jump up to verse 8 to see what he's talking about. So it's like, okay, well, he said, let no man judge you in meat or in drink or in the laws or the holy days. So what is he talking about if we still have to keep the commandments?
Colossians 2 and 8. Beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world.
So someone telling you that the things in which they prefer to do, the things that are diets that resurface, you know, the vegetarian doctrine, the vegan doctrine, say, you know, those are a good way to eat. That's a good way to live. The scriptures talk about a man that has care of his meats, but that is not a law. And that's what typically becomes the problem, because the children of Israel, or with people typically, they try to turn these little doctrines, these fads, these diets into law. And that's not the case. That's why the scriptures say, through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men. That's why he said, don't let any man judge you in meat. He's not saying that they're now no longer lawful and unlawful or clean and unclean, but he's saying the doctrines that come out, those things are not that are not specified in the scriptures, do not have to be followed. Again, going back to Romans chapter 4, there's no law, there's no sin. And let me see. Last scripture that I'm going to get, going back to Genesis chapter 7, just to show that the dietary law was in effect even prior to Moses. Because when Noah, during the time of the flood, the popular story goes that Noah was told to gather 2 of every animal, but he was actually told to gather 7 of the of the clean animals and 2 of the unclean animals. And the only way for Noah to have known the difference between clean and unclean is for that law to already have existed prior to it appearing in Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14. Go ahead.
Genesis chapter 7 and verse, you want 1 or 2?
Genesis chapter 2.
Oh, Genesis 2.
Well, no, Genesis chapter 7, I'm sorry, verse 1. You start at verse 1.
Okay, verse 1. And the Lord said unto Noah, come thou and all thy house into the ark. For thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation. Of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by 7s.
So he said of every clean beast, you have to take it by 7s. So that goes to show, even since the beginning, before there was ever the other books or before Moses, these laws were still in effect. These laws were still given to the people. Go ahead.
The male and his female, and of beasts that are not clean by 2, the male and his female.
So there were clean and there were unclean, as it has been since the beginning. The children of Israel were given these laws. These laws are still in effect to today, until today. They'll be in effect forevermore. But man, be careful what you eat. Be careful what you're partaking of. Make sure to do your due diligence as far as what it is that you're eating, and what it is that's set before you. And with that, I'm gonna go ahead and say shalom. If there's not anything that you wanted to bring out.
Just one point that Paul talks about concerning what Shamar had brought out earlier about the example of GMO food and stuff that's lawful for us to eat and not particularly out of the guidelines of in Leviticus 11, such as a beast that dies of itself, but stuff like plants with GMO. Paul says this in 1 Corinthians 10 and 20, chapter 10, and I'm gonna jump between the 20s. So he says, all things. Yeah.
I'll read it for you.
Okay.
1 Corinthians 10 and 20. But
23.
23.
Yeah.
All things are lawful for me, but all things are not expedient. All things are lawful for me, but all things edify not.
So again, the things that he's talking about, all things that are lawful, are within the law. But when he says all things are not expedient or all things are edify not, that's where you gotta kind of have to use your judgment between things that you're doing with they say people with a weak faith or a weak conscience, and things that according to knowing that the world has been defiled, what you can do when you're moving with people or kind of moving on your own. This in verse 25.
Verse 25, whatsoever is sold in the shambles, that eat, asking no question for conscience sake.
So that conscience sake comes from, again, asking, or if you get food from a restaurant, for instance, and okay, I got a hamburger, you don't know necessarily the grill, for instance, that they use, that they cook the hamburger with on.
That's a good example.
A lot of these, restaurants, mom and pops, on the grill, maybe on one side they be cooking, the beef, and the other side they may do pork. But as we know, as Shamar just brought out in the law, those ovens are supposed to be, destroyed according to the law. But because the Most High says, verse 26, for the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. So when it comes to meat and just using, I believe, using wisdom, Paul says, when it comes to things that are lawful for you, that are presented before you, eat for your conscience sake, with your conscience's sake. If you know in your conscience, though, that you're convicted, don't partake it, because that becomes that essentially becomes sin unto your conscience sake. But again,
read verse 27.
Verse 27. And if any of them that believe not bid you to a feast, and ye be disposed to go, whatsoever is set before you, eat, asking no question for conscience sake.
So again, that's something that people try to use to say that Paul did not keep the laws are no longer in effect. The scriptures make it very clear in 2 Maccabees, I believe, chapter 6, with the woman and 7 sons, as well as saying, strive for the truth unto death. It doesn't mean if somebody puts an obvious pork chop in front of you that you're still supposed to partake, and then just don't ask about it. I mean, it tastes like pork, smells like pork, looks like pork. It's not saying that. But if you have something that is lawful, and for example, I have family members that cook. They love to cook. They love to have family dinners, and they might bake a cake. And I can't say, well, is there gelatin in this cake? Gelatin is skin, bones, or fat of an animal that's broken down and used as an additive for baking or cooking. So it's only a limit as to what you can really understand and what you can ask for people as far as the information of what you're eating. If it's chicken and asparagus, say ask not for conscience sake. Don't be like, well, was this chicken killed lawfully and did it die? There's only a certain extent as to how far you can go and where the limitation of their knowledge is what your knowledge is going to go to. Because by asking all those questions again, like he said, for conscience sake, you might start to convict yourself and say, well, I don't know how this animal died. Unless you killed it, you never really know how anything dies.
Really?
That's where it says, well, for your conscience sake, don't ask for those things. Sit and eat. If it's lawful, it's chicken and it's asparagus, all right, then I'm going to eat it. I'm not going to ask these questions for conscience sake. Go on to verse 28, because he also makes it clear about standing for the law. So that's one of the things that Paul did. He was like, I'm not saying break the law. Go ahead.
Verse 28, but if any man say unto you, this is offered in sacrifice unto idols.
So we're going to have this meal in honor of Baal or Beelzebub or whatever other god, Molech, whatever the case may be. Or even for the pagan meals that a lot of people partake of, coming together for Christmas. It's a meal sacrificed unto idol. Even if you try to find a loophole and find a way around it, or I'm just gonna eat the turkey, I'm just gonna eat the things that are lawful, it's sacrificed unto an idol. That feast is literally being held in honor of a pagan god. That has nothing to do with you. But go ahead.
Eat not for his sake that showed it, and for conscience sake. For the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof.
Eat not for his sake that showed it. He says, so those are the things that you're not supposed to partake of. That's when you draw that line and say, all right, look, this is not something that I can eat. And, we've all had those issues. I came into the truth being young, still living in my mother's and father's house, but I made it clear there are certain things that I'm not going to eat. If you don't eat, you go into bed. Okay, then I'm going to bed hungry. That's why, there are holy days like the Day of Atonement that teaches you how to fast and teach you that discipline, because there are times where your faith gets tested, or you're compelled to eat, and you have to refuse those things, striving for the law unto death. So If there are any other questions, of course, they can always be sent in. We can deal with anybody at another time. But at this point in time, I'm going to wrap it up and I'll say shalom.
Shalom.